thank you everyone for coming to the presentations tonight. It's been great to have so many people kind of checking out, and we are recording also just if anyone else wants to view these later, that would be great. All right, so next up is Diane Knoll. She is going to be talking about exteroception and interoception in autistic adults. So I will go ahead and let you take it away, Diane.
Great. Hi. So I kind of chose this topic because part of what I do is a private practice where I work with neurodivergent adults. So developing this program was really helpful for my practice with them. And give me a second while I get this to go forward. Okay. I love how it decides not to work as soon as my capstone starts. Okay, here we went too far. There we go. Let me go back. Okay, so starting just to talk about what we actually know right now about the adult autistic community, the most important thing I think is knowing that they have a clear preference for identity first language. And you'll see that a lot on social media and things like that. They preferred to be called autistic. So for that sake, I have referenced them in that way for my presentation. And we also know that there's been an increase in autism diagnoses in recent years in the adult population. A lot of my clients are coming to me with, in their 30s and 40s with a new diagnosis of autism. And so autistic individuals often receive insufficient services from occupational therapists. So only 4% receiving services after high school compared to 26% of autistic children aged 3 to 7. And what we will know from later on in the literature review is that sensory issues don't go away when you turn 18. And to talk about what exteroception and interoception is, a lot of us might know the term interoception, but exteroception is not something I commonly saw before I started doing research. So exteroception is what we would traditionally refer to as sensory processing. So it's the information we get from all our external environmental cues. And then interoception is really referring to the body's ability to perceive internal signals. So things like pain, temperature, hunger, thirst, fullness, itch, tickle, and even sensations from our muscles and our organs in our body. And then in 2013, Garfinkel et al. Also came up, and I'll talk about this a little bit later in the literature review. There were 3 states of interoception, including accuracy, sensitivity, and sensibility. And really, we need to understand that understanding both the interoceptive experiences and the exteroceptive experiences is crucial in not only neurodivergent populations, but also in mental health and trauma. So I went ahead and I did a literature review. And these were the things I was looking to figure out in the literature review. The first was just exploring the evidence regarding autistic adults and their experiences with exteroceptive and interoceptive processing. Then kind of figuring out what's the connection between these two systems during the adult years of autistic people. And then finally is determining whether autistic adults would benefit from a combined approach of both interoceptive awareness and those kind of external sensory processing strategies so that they could better navigate their daily routines and occupations. The methods I used to complete the literature review was just a systematic search of those databases listed there. They were all written in English, dated from 2012 to 2022. Search terms included interoception, interoceptive, exteroceptive, sensory processing, sensory integration, autism, alexithymia, autism and pain, and then autistic adults. And there was a total of 20 articles for my literature review, and only original articles were used that came from peer-reviewed journals when completing the process. For the study selection, the population inclusion criteria had to include individuals 18 and older that had a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. Both female and male genders were included. and subject matter incorporated articles that discussed interoception or sensory processing and/or in both neurotypical and autistic populations, with a focus being specific to the adult experiences of both. And then I also, again, searches regarding autism and pain were included as it was associated with both our interoceptive and exteroceptive pathways. And then I left out any studies that focused on children only. And you may see my cat, he's excited to join us. So really the literature review ended up being kind of thematic. So the first theme really was exteroception, and these were the things that came up under it. There were basically two theoretical underpinnings and terminology that came out for exteroceptive. One of them was, and these were very long, so I kind of have a cheat sheet off to the side, but all the references are there for you. One was that, a lot of people had predictive coding errors as a theme for sensory processing differences. And then a second common theory that came up was Dunn's model of sensory processing. And actually Dunn's model was the most commonly referenced in all the articles that I reviewed. And then exteroceptive processing in autistic adults, I wanted to know exactly what was out there. So again, a lot of studies out there about kids, fewer look at adults, but there was actually a full literature review on adults and their exteroceptive experiences. And that one found by Prof. Anomalies in vision, sound, touch, and multisensory processing. Knoll et al. Also found that autistic adults had a larger temporal binding window than neurotypical adults when processing both audiovisual and visual tactile information. And then one qualitative study that actually I found really helpful for most of my literature review was it was reviewing works by autistic authors, and it found that all of the authors that they reviewed reported sensory processing challenges that carried over from childhood. So making a pretty strong case that yes, it does not go away when you turn 18. Okay. And then another theme I found under exteroception was that hyper and hyposensitivity. Really, a lot of it, the hypersensitivity is really considered a hallmark of autism diagnosis and was consistently reported on by autistic adults. Some research suggested a shift in hypersensitivity with age. So initially, as children, people might present as a mixed profile of hypo and hypersensitivity, and later into adulthood, it evolved more into a predominant pattern of hypersensitivity. And then, but in contrast to that, autistic adults that might have had a lower cognitive functioning, they tended to display more kind of low registration type profiles and hyposensitive. So they would have reduced body awareness and a need for pronounced proprioceptive input. And really the big thing I kind of learned from this is that because the autistic population is so heterogeneous, we can't say it's definitely going to be one way or the other. We have to kind of take into account there's lots of different types, different profiles that are out there. And then looking at themes for interoception, a common one that came up for theory basically was the three-dimensional model of interoception, and that's by Garfinkel and Critchley. That includes interoceptive accuracy, which is defined as the metacognitive awareness of interoceptive sensitivity. The second is interoceptive sensitivity, which looks at accurate detection of internal body signals, and this can be objectively measured. And the third concept is interoceptive sensibility, which is being able to focus on internal body sensations and self-report on them. And again, the predictive coding theory did pop up again in this for interoception as well. And then when we're talking about what interoceptive processing looked like specifically for autistic adults, again, there was mixed research. I have some thoughts about that, which I'll talk about later. So some studies showed that challenges in interoception are settled or adapted once into adulthood. That was Nicholson et al. And Palzer et al. But other studies contradicted those findings. So Fine and Brownlow, Prof. and Trevison, those all found the opposite of that. A lot of that was kind of due to the number of subjects that were in the study, and kind of and there was one study that was like children up to age 19. So there were some results in there that were adults, but it wasn't, they didn't specify like how many were, 18 and 19 versus the other in the sample. But specific examples of interoceptive differences that were found included heartbeat perception, respiratory, hunger, fullness, thirst, temperature, pain, the onset of illness, and fatigue. And then we also found the interoceptive experience of pain. Autistic adults were found to have both increased neural and behavioral responses to pain. And then again, interoceptive hyper and hyposensitivity did pop up. Hypersensitivity was found to be present in all ages. Some examples of this in the adult population included detecting small changes in the way the body felt, and that would be more kind of like hypochondria would come up in that area. And then also sometimes that would come up with pain for them. And then what Mayer found, their research was that interoceptive experiences appears to have a stronger correlation with hyposensitivity. So this again includes kind of that poor awareness of thirst, hunger, and fullness, and sometimes having a high pain tolerance. I did want to there was some alexithymia themes that came up as well in the research. Again, alexithymia is defined as having problems identifying and being able to relate to emotions. And then again, findings in the review, alexithymia was very mixed. And then let's see if it goes. Here we go. Okay. And then just talking about that piece about how they impacted each other, those interconnections between exteroceptive and interoceptive domains. Both Knoll and Dobrashina's studies found that those two systems really were linked neurologically. Beyond the neuroanatomy, Marshall et al. Study in 2022 talked about that, really found that improving processing in either interoception or exteroception would impact the processing of the other. Du Bois et al. Study identified interoception as a crucial aspect of sensory processing in autism. And then, let me see, there was one more study that did find, this is by Edwards et al. In 2018, found that deep touch pressure, so proprioceptive input, improved interoceptive accuracy in the neurotypical population. And that's really the first study that I've seen out there that had that in there. So I found it really interesting. And then interoceptive and exteroceptive behavioral and health impacts. So just kind of thinking about how this impacts autistic adults throughout their lifespan, that it can lead to potential health risks, such as if they're unable to really talk about what they're, be able to pick up on their heartbeat, we might miss things like cardiac arrhythmia, appetite suppression, dehydration, heat exhaustion, or malnourishment. So again, just thinking about discussion about the literature review is, like I said before, those quantitative studies were sometimes limited by small sample sizes. And then sometimes in the qualitative studies of sample sizes, it was more difficult to define how many people were actually in that study. There was one that was really just a review of a website of autistic voices, and they kind of just did a search for things on interoception and exteroception. And so it wasn't really clear about how many adults actually participated, because it was a lot of just different posts. This is another thing I think that, especially when we're looking at the research recently, this study is that heartbeat detection was frequently used to determine interoceptive ability, but there is a 2009 study that showed that 40% of the general population can't even perceive their heart rate. So again, sometimes I have to think what does that really look like then if we're using that as a way to monitor? Are we getting that accurate of results? And then just thinking about the level of evidence in the studies I reviewed, is there were none that used a randomized control trial, which is that highest level of evidence. And just again, thinking about future studies, we need to be including larger samples and have some randomized clinical trials. So from there, I did do a needs assessment, and this is just some of the things I found from my primary and secondary sources. The CDC estimated there's about 5,438 autistic adults in the US, making up 2.21% of the adult population. The Government Accountability Office report showed that over 500,000 autistic youth would become adults between 2016 and 2026. And autism is a lifelong condition. So the CDC again said there's really a strong need for ongoing services. And only 4%, like I said before, only 4% of these adults receive OT services after high school. And we know that the literature review also showed that both interoceptive and exteroceptive experiences impacted components of autistic adults' daily lives. And beyond the primary and secondary sources, I did have some of my clients be the stakeholder responses in my needs assessment. So there were 6 clients. They ranged in ages from 18 to 44. Genders were evenly split, 3 female, 3 male, and all had actually received a late diagnosis. So when talking about ADLs, all of the adults identified at least one area of impact that their exteroceptive differences had on their ADL routine. The average was 2, and there was a high of 1 person reporting basically challenges with all areas of ADL except toileting and toilet management. And then in regards to interoception, 2 out of 6 clients reported challenges with those homeostatic feelings of hunger, thirst, or fullness. And then for the IADLs, all clients reported challenges with 2 or more IADLs, with the average being about 3. And then to kind of go on from interoception, you'll see in my program development, I use the ISQ, but when I talk to my clients, I actually use Kelly Muller's assessment, so which I like because she talks more about emotional regulation, but all clients did report challenges with emotional regulation and being able to discriminate how emotions felt. 3 out of 6 of them reported hyposensitivity to pain, and 1 client reported that emotional dysregulation and physical illness can feel similar in their body, and that it was difficult to tell if they were getting sick. And then all participants reported a strong desire to learn coping skills for their exteroceptive and interoceptive differences as a priority. And other priorities that came up were increasing confidence for social situations, tolerance for driving or riding in a car, and tolerating triggers at work. So then creating a plan to implement those needs that we found, I created an 8-week educational program focusing on interoception and exteroception paired together, implementing a holistic sensory health plan with autistic adults. So prior to beginning the program, all the participants needed to complete a 30-minute virtual interview with me using the COPM, and that was to assess areas of occupational performance that was impacted. 2 assessments were used also before they started that to just get a baseline for interoceptive and exteroceptive profiles. These standardized assessments were the Adolescent Adult Sensory History, Teresa May Benson of the Spiral Foundation, and then also the ISQ, which I mentioned earlier, which was done with work from Fine et al. And then participants met with me once a week for 8 weeks for 60 minutes in a virtual session. And then each week we focused on a different exteroceptive sense, and we paired it with interoceptive experiments from Kelly Muller's The Interoception Curriculum. And then at the end of participating in the program, there was a virtual exit interview that was again scheduled for 30 minutes and used the COPM just to figure out changes in occupational performance. And this is just what the protocol looked like. Hopefully I'll have time to show you just an example of what that looked, but this was started with proprioception and kind of went through all the senses, and then took some different experiments from each one that would kind of pair with what the external sense was. So for the program, I was able to recruit 3 participants to participate. The first, I called him participant number 1. He was a 27-year-old autistic male, and he was able to complete the full program with me. And then I had two others that did not complete the full program. One was a 40-year-old autistic female. She made it up to week 2. And the 43-year-old autistic female, number 3, completed up to week 6. And both of them just had scheduling conflicts due to childcare issues. So that was a bummer because I wished I could have completed it with them, but I'm still pretty happy with the results that I did get. And so just so you can kind of see those baseline scores of both exteroceptive and interoceptive. This is number 1, the gentleman that did complete the activity with me. You can see they had sensory modulation and discrimination differences, as well as some motor coordination stuff going on. And they were really he was really the most impacted too, as far as interoception went, with that, in the 33rd percentile. And then my second participant was the one that made it up to 2 weeks with me. She, again, had, some modulation differences as well as discrimination. She really interoceptive as far as homeostatic feelings, which is really what the ISQ measures, didn't have a lot of things going on. And then my third participant, she made it through week 6, definitely had some modulation things going on, some mild motor coordination, and she was kind of right, in the middle of that 54th percentile, had some things, but wasn't very significant. And so participant 1, this is the fella who finished the full program with me. This is what his COPM looked like. So he identified 3 areas. Socialization was really hard for him, and at that moment he was having a significant low dysregulation for multiple reasons. So the timing worked out perfectly. Work, he never was working full-time. He was kind of freelance. And then volunteering, he was very important to him. He worked with Pages for Prisoners, so getting books to people that are in prison. So initially performance was rated pretty low, an average of 4. Satisfaction with that performance, an average of 3.6. And then when we finished in November through the full program, you can see those scores. Socialization, which was ranked the highest for him, that doubled, and then the satisfaction with that did as well. Work, again, because he's more freelance, there were some small changes, but that one was probably the least impacted. And then volunteering, again, because he felt more comfortable being social, he was able to volunteer more. And so those scores really went up again. And then these are just some of his comments. He is really into music. So when we did auditory, that was a very fun week for him. Making playlists, especially satisfying. We did some mood regulating playlists. So that was a joy for him. I'm going to make a point of doing more proprioceptive activities as well. He said, I learned to pay more attention to each sense, and now I'm more aware of smell and will cultivate it. And working with the OT helped me through a very difficult period when I was dealing with severe OCD. And then these are just some notes that I took down as well. During the sessions, he reported that learning about interoception helped him to tune into his body signals sooner in regards to hunger and needing to use the bathroom. And then what he found is because he could tune into him sooner, that really helped decrease his anxiety, because I think they weren't sneaking up on him at the last minute. He also found that swinging and use of a weighted blanket really helped him improve his mood during moments of challenge with obsessive thoughts. And then even though these 2 didn't get to finish the program, participant 2 did say she was beginning to start using some of the exteroceptive and interoceptive strategies taught. And she found she felt more focused and alert when using linear vestibular input. She had a yoga swing in her house that she used with her kids. And then she started using it. It was like, oh, even just a minute of this makes a big difference for focus. And then participant number 3 reported using some of the exteroceptive strategies, such as tactile, vestibular, linear, visual, and proprioceptive input. And she also reported finding rocking in her rocking chair was addicting in a good way, and said it helped her feel more regulated when interacting with her foster children. So again, just kind of conclusions about this. The literature review did find that autistic adults do experience both exteroceptive and interoceptive challenges. Intake results of this program showed exteroceptive differences and with all of them, and then 1 out of 3 challenges with interoception. But then again, just thinking about this at the ISQ-8, it is kind of one of the more stronger standardized interoception assessments, but it doesn't really look at emotional regulation. And just a side note that there are more assessments that are kind of in the process of being developed. Brown and Dunn are adding to the sensory profile and doing a sensory profile interoception, but as far as I know, it is not out yet. And then the COPM did show significant improvements with both performance and satisfaction with the identified occupational performance problems by participant number 1. Again, kind of limiting factors in the whole thing was that I did lose 2 participants due to their own scheduling conflicts. All participants, regardless of completion, did report improvements with self-regulation. And really further studies exploring this topic would just be aimed to have more participants and hopefully provide a longer window of time to complete the program. Because 8 weeks, it was really hard if one thing came up, just trying to reschedule them and still get it done in time. Gains in these areas can be made really quickly with this population. So 8 weeks is pretty good considering where, the gains we made. And really, this is kind of my big soapbox, is that OTs, we need to be implementing programs that include both interoceptive and exteroceptive education for autistic adults. And that was the end of my slideshow. I can, if people are interested, I can show you just an example of kind of like visuals I would use with them. Let me switch and stop share real quick. I have one, just an example, kind of what vestibular looked like. So especially because we're online, I find that like use of visuals is really helpful. So this is just an example of something I came up with just to kind of facilitate the conversation. It's just giving some examples and then sitting down with them and figuring out like what are some things you might already be doing and not realize that you're doing it to regulate yourself, as well as giving them some new ideas to kind of incorporate it into their routine. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, I'm fielding any questions in the chat as well. So either speak out, raise your hand, make a chat.
Mine's a comment, but that could turn into a question. So I love that you were kind of going in on the adult population with interoception and with all of this and really working more at an empowering level. I love that you did that. Did you find any challenges that you felt were unique to an adult population?
Well, I would say I think scheduling is probably the biggest one, right? Is that, competing needs would come up of like, oh, I have my kids and I don't, they're off today, so I have to cancel my appointment. I think just the depression rate and anxiety rate, because they've just been living with it for a longer period of time, it would pop up. I could say, I've had clients tell me that are adults and they're not any of the participants, but, like basically they were on the verge of suicide right before they found someone to help them with that. And then that person made a quick turnaround in 3 months and is thriving now, but it's like just so basic. They just need the education piece of understanding like, this is how your sensory system works. And these are some strategies you can use to help regulate it. And then I think, the other piece a lot of adults will tell you is just the masking for so long, especially because I tend to get a bunch of 30 to 40-year-old women kind of discovering that they're autistic for the first time. I think those are just the things that have been really beneficial to me with working with adults, is like understanding like, hey, we need to pass this on to people working with kids, because if they're spending decades living like this. Their nervous systems are just, taxed beyond what we can even really consider, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. It's important work. You need to publish this.
Okay.
You do. Like, if you want help doing that, I'm more than happy to help you, but you really do. You need to get this out there because not enough people recognize that there's a way to provide services to adults and make a living.
Yeah.
And
It's
you
so
have figured
easy
it
too.
out. You
It's
have
such a
figured it
joy.
out. So
It's going to be my question. So and correct me if I'm wrong, Carrie, and I could be wrong. I am wrong sometimes. That you are the only, or maybe one of few that have your own practice, a private practice. So can you talk a little bit about how you will implement this moving forward or not, or what you would change? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I really want to turn this into a continuing education course for other OTs. Because again, I worked in private practice for kids, and we would have a couple adults come in, and my coworkers would be like, I don't know how to work with them, right? Because it seems daunting, but it's like so easy. It's just basically it's an education piece. And we did it all via telehealth. So there was some, they did some actual activities, but a lot of it was just really learning. So I'd like to do that, and then I'd like to turn it into some sort of handbook, or for adults too, that they could find and do themselves as well, because right now I can currently only work with clients in the state of Washington, and so I know that there's a bigger need that's out there beyond that.
Yeah, I agree with Carrie, there very much is. Yeah.
we're working on that compact. We're just not getting very far.
I know. So I'm only doing this like a day and a half a week. And I'm purposely not advertising or doing anything like that because I have a wait list already.
Got it.
You have a wait list.
Mhm.
Mm.
So you could advertise if you wanted to.
I could, but I am
If
also
there was
doing
more of her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm also doing
Yeah.
school 3 days a week. So that's really my goal, is to like create a continuing ed course so that other OTs can start doing this work, so that there are more options. Because that's another thing most of my clients will tell me is like, I have been looking for someone forever and haven't been able to find anyone.
Yeah. Really important work. Nice job, Diane.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any questions for Diane? No? All right. Well, thank you all so much again for your time and for attending. And Diane, that was awesome. Thank you so much. There's a couple comments in the chat, so make sure you check those out, Diane, before you log off.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so I will conclude this. Carrie, do you have anything to add before we sign off tonight?
Just super impressed with everybody's work. There's 2 more tomorrow night. So if you're so inclined, I know they would appreciate your support tomorrow evening as well. But everybody, just really great job. I'm excited to see doctor in front of all of your names. And I am just going to go out on a limb here. I'm hearing, like, of all your presentations, I'm hearing this like common thread of there's this like continuing ed opportunity. So it's sitting in my head, and there's some things on the horizon at Elizabethtown that I think might lend itself an opportunity for some of what you guys are talking about. So I'd say, don't take, the temptation is great to walk away tonight and be like, I'm done with that. I don't ever think about it again. But you all have some really incredible things that I think possibly have some wings that could go in really cool directions. And so let's keep talking about ways to make it awesome, because this stuff is way too good to lose track of. So nice job.
All right, hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow. Be awesome.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you all for your time. Have a good night.
Hey.